Right now, someone you follow online is posting a photo that looks effortless. A promotion, a vacation, a relationship that seems to just work. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a quiet thought creeps in. Everyone else seems to have this figured out. Except you. Here's the strange part. That person scrolling through your profile might be thinking the exact same thing about you. This isn't a coincidence. And it isn't just insecurity talking. It's a well-documented psychological pattern. And once you understand how it works, it becomes very hard to unsee. Today, we're going to look at why confidence seems so unevenly distributed. Why the people who look most certain are often just as unsure as everyone else. And what you can actually do to build a sense of security that doesn't depend on comparing yourself to a stranger's highlight reel. Let's start with a simple truth. Humans are remarkably bad at reading each other's internal states. We can see someone's posture, their tone of voice, the words they choose. What we cannot see is the anxious rehearsal that happened before they walked into the room, or the doubt they're quietly sitting with while they smile and nod. Psychologists have a name for the gap this creates. It's called pluralistic ignorance, a situation where a group of people privately reject or doubt something, but publicly go along with it because they assume everyone else actually believes it. The classic example comes from college drinking culture. Researchers found that many students privately felt uncomfortable with heavy drinking at parties, but assumed their peers were fully on board with it. So they went along with behavior nobody actually wanted, because everyone was reading everyone else's performance instead of their private reality. The same mechanism plays out with confidence. You feel uncertain, so you perform calm. The person next to you feels uncertain, so they perform calm too. Now you're both looking at each other's performance and concluding that you're the only one struggling. It's a hall of mirrors, and almost nobody realizes they're standing inside one. There's a second force at work here, and it comes from something psychologists call social comparison theory, first proposed by Leon Festinger back in the 1950s. Festinger's basic idea was that humans evaluate themselves by comparing against others, especially when there's no objective yardstick. How do you know if you're doing well in your career, your relationships, your personal growth? There's no built-in scoreboard, so your brain looks outward for reference points. The problem is what you're comparing against. You are comparing your full, unfiltered internal experience, your doubts, your bad days, your 2 a.m. worries, against other people's edited external presentation. That's not a fair comparison. It was never going to be. And yet your brain runs it anyway, over and over, often without your permission.
This gets even more interesting when we bring in a concept called the illusion of explanatory depth. Researchers at Yale found that people consistently overestimate how well they understand how everyday things work. How a bicycle functions, how a toilet flushes, until they're asked to actually explain it step by step, at which point the illusion collapses. The same thing happens with life in general. From a distance, other people's paths look coherent, like they followed some clear internal logic. Up close, if you actually asked them to explain it, you'd hear about the same confusion, the same wrong turns, the same guessing that you experience yourself. We tend to narrate our own lives in real time, moment by uncertain moment. But we perceive other people's lives as finished stories already edited into something that makes sense. A friend's career change looks like a bold, confident decision from where you're standing. From where they stood, it probably felt like a coin flip they made while terrified. There's also a well-studied bias called illusory superiority, sometimes referred to as the better-than-average effect. Decades of research show that most people rate themselves as more competent, more moral and better at most tasks than the average person, which is statistically impossible for a majority to be true. Interestingly, this same bias distorts how we imagine others too. We tend to assume other people's inner lives are more put together than our own, partly because we have no access to their internal footage, only their external trailer. Put these three things together: pluralistic ignorance, unfair social comparison, and the illusion of explanatory depth, and you get a very convincing but completely false impression that everyone around you receives some manual for adulthood that you somehow missed. Researchers who study young adults, particularly on college campuses, have given this a more specific name: duck syndrome. Picture a duck gliding smoothly across a pond. Above the waterline, everything looks calm and effortless. Below the surface, its legs are paddling frantically just to stay afloat. Studies out of Stanford found that many high-achieving students privately felt overwhelmed and anxious. While believing their peers were breezing through with ease, everyone was paddling. Nobody could see anyone else's legs. So if the appearance of confidence is mostly an illusion built from limited information and unfair comparisons, the real question becomes, how do you build something more durable than appearance? Not the performance of having it figured out, but an actual, steady sense of okayness that doesn't collapse the moment you compare yourself to someone else's trailer.
The first shift is learning to separate comparison from information. Comparison isn't inherently bad. It's actually how humans calibrate and set goals. The problem is when comparison becomes constant and untethered from context, which is exactly what happens when you're scrolling, rather than actually knowing someone's full situation. A useful practice here is what some psychologists call comparison auditing. When you notice that familiar tightening in your chest, that everyone else has this figured out feeling, pause and ask a specific question. What am I actually comparing right now? Am I comparing my internal experience to their external presentation? 9 times out of 10, the answer is yes, and simply naming that mismatch weakens its grip. You're not telling yourself to stop comparing, which rarely works. You're just making the comparison accurate instead of distorted. The second technique comes from the work of psychologist Kristin Neff, whose research over the past 2 decades has focused on something called self-compassion. Neff's studies found that self-compassion, treating yourself with the same understanding you'd offer a friend, especially during moments of failure or doubt, is a far stronger predictor of emotional resilience than self-esteem. This matters because self-esteem is often built on comparison. It rises when you're doing better than others and crashes when you're not, which makes it inherently unstable. Self-compassion doesn't ask how you measure up. It only asks how you're doing and whether you can meet that honestly, without the harsh internal commentary that usually follows a moment of struggling. A simple way to practice this. The next time you catch yourself in self-critical language, something like, "I should have this figured out by now," try translating it into the language you'd actually use with someone you cared about. Not empty positivity, just accurate kindness. Most people are far more patient, far more understanding, and far less judgmental toward their friends than they are toward themselves. Self-compassion simply asks you to extend that same baseline decency inward. The third insight draws on self-determination theory, developed by psychologists Edward Deci and Richard Ryan, which has become one of the most influential frameworks in motivation research. Their work identifies 3 core psychological needs that drive lasting well-being: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. In plain terms, feeling like your choices are your own, feeling capable, and feeling genuinely connected to others. Confidence that depends on external validation is fragile because it's borrowed from outside sources that can disappear at any time. A like count, a comparison, someone else's approval. Confidence built on autonomy, and competence is different. It comes from setting goals that are actually yours, not goals absorbed from watching other people's lives, and then building real, demonstrable skill toward them, one small completed thing at a time. This is worth sitting with, because it reframes the entire problem. The goal was never to eliminate self-doubt. Every competent, capable person you admire still experiences it regularly. Research on imposter phenomenon, first described by psychologists Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes in the late 1970s, found that even highly accomplished professionals, physicians, executives, tenured academics, routinely feel like frauds who are about to be found out, despite clear external evidence of their competence. Doubt isn't a sign that you're behind. It's simply what it feels like to be a self-aware person doing something that matters to you. What changes, for people who eventually build real confidence, isn't the disappearance of doubt. It's their relationship to it. They stop treating uncertainty as proof that everyone else is ahead, and start treating it as background noise that shows up whenever you're doing something meaningful. They stop outsourcing their sense of worth to a constantly shifting external scoreboard, and start anchoring it in something steadier, Are my choices actually mine? Am I getting a little more capable over time? And do I have real connection with people who know me beyond the edited version? None of this happens instantly, and no single video, including this one, is going to dissolve years of comparison-based thinking in 12 minutes. But awareness is the starting point every single time. The next time you find yourself convinced that everyone else has some secret you're missing, remember the duck on the pond. Remember that you are comparing your unedited footage to someone else's trailer. And remember that the people who look most certain from the outside are very often paddling just as hard beneath the surface as you are. Confidence, real confidence, was never about having zero doubt. It was about building a life, your choices, your growing skills, your honest relationships, sturdy enough to hold that doubt without being defined by it. If this perspective shifted something for you, even slightly, consider subscribing. This channel is built around exactly this kind of idea, taking the quiet, psychological patterns that shape how we feel about ourselves and making them visible enough to actually work with. New videos come out regularly, breaking down the research behind the everyday thoughts and feelings we rarely stop to examine. So if you want more of this, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.